Hey, my name's Eli. I'm 24. Or I was when this started. 3 weeks ago. No. Wait. Has it been a month now? Time blurs out here. Let's call it a month. A month ago, I packed everything I cared about into the back of a dusty 2009 Ford Escape. And that's a generous description. Everything I cared about fit into 3 cardboard boxes and a duffel bag. The boxes held books I hadn't read, a coffee maker that only worked if you jiggled the cord, and a framed photo of my parents I hadn't looked at in years. The duffel bag held jeans with holes in the knees and a few t-shirts that smelled like defeat. I left Columbus for good. I left the job that had been grinding me down for 14 months, an open-plan office nightmare of fluorescent lights and beige cubicles where I stared at spreadsheets until the numbers swam. I was a junior data analyst, which was a fancy way of saying I was the guy who got coffee and was blamed for formatting errors. The grinding wasn't the work, though. It was the silence. The way everyone typed and clicked, headsets on, like we were all in individual glass jars, slowly running out of air. The day I left, I just stood up. My monitor was still glowing with a pivot table. I grabbed my jacket, left my security pass on the desk, and I walked out. No one even looked up. I left the apartment with the leaking ceiling. A permanent, slow drip, drip, drip into a Tupperware container on the kitchen floor. A soundtrack to my 20s. It always smelled faintly of mildew and the curry from the apartment downstairs. And I left the girl, Sarah. The girl who said she needed space, which turned out to be code for, I've been seeing my yoga instructor for 3 weeks. She said it, of course, after I'd finished carrying the first load of boxes to the curb. We stood there on the sidewalk, the city smelling like hot garbage and bus exhaust. She couldn't even look me in the eye. "It's just, you're stuck, Eli," she'd said, flicking a piece of lint off her ridiculously expensive Lululemon jacket. "You're just here, and I want to be somewhere." I guess I couldn't argue with that. I was stuck. I was here. So I watched her walk away, got back in the Ford Escape that was probably worth less than her yoga mat, and I didn't look in the rearview mirror once. Not when I pulled out of the parking spot, not when I merged onto I-70 West, not when the skyline of Columbus, the city that was supposed to be my new start, dissolved into a hazy smudge behind me. I drove. 6 hours west on I-70. The sun was a brutal, blinding thing. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence in the car was better than the noise in my head. I passed billboards for fireworks, corn mazes, and Jesus, exits I used to know by heart as a kid, exits that led to pumpkin patches and friends' houses I hadn't thought of in a decade. They felt alien, like props from a different person's life. Then, the last 20 minutes. The interstate gives way to the state route, and the state route gives way to the county roads. Narrow, 2-lane blacktops lined with sagging barns and golden soybean fields, stretching out to the horizon. The air changed. The thick, diesel-choked city air was scrubbed away, replaced by something that smelled of cut hay and damp earth. Home. Or whatever was left of it. The house my parents left me sits at the end of Willow Creek Lane, a 2-story clapboard thing that was probably white once. Now it was a peeling, ghostly gray. It had a wraparound porch that creaked like it was telling secrets. Dad died when I was 19. A sudden, quiet heart attack in the middle of a Tuesday. Mom followed 2 years later, more from a broken heart than the pneumonia the doctors listed on the chart. Since then, the place has just been waiting. Shutters closed, grass growing wild, the way old houses do when nobody's left to love them. I pulled into the graveled driveway just after noon. The crunch, crunch, crunch of the tires felt impossibly loud. I killed the engine and sat there. Just sat, listening to the tick, tick, tick of cooling metal. The silence felt huge, physical. After the city, it was deafening. No sirens, no upstairs neighbors arguing through the walls. Just cicadas, a relentless sawing thrum, and that faint smell of hay. I told myself I was only coming back to breathe, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with the rest of my life. A pit stop, a reset, nothing permanent. Famous last words. The first night was the worst. I spent the afternoon hauling those same 3 boxes and a duffel bag inside. The air in the house was stale, thick with dust motes that danced in the slivers of light I let in. I wiped a thick layer of grime off the oak table in the kitchen, the one Dad built. I opened windows that hadn't been touched in years, the hinges screaming in protest. But when the sun went down, the house changed. The emptiness wasn't peaceful anymore. It was hungry. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of wind in the overgrown ivy sounded like an accusation. Where have you been? Why did you leave us? I couldn't sleep. The old twin bed in my childhood room felt small, the mattress thin. I found a half-empty bottle of whiskey, Dad's whiskey, Jameson, tucked in the back of the pantry. I sat on the back steps, the rotting wood cold beneath me, and drank straight from the bottle. The whiskey burned, a welcome, familiar pain. I watched the fireflies blink in the dark, and for the first time since I'd left Columbus, I let myself cry. Not for Sarah, not for the job, for them, for this house, for the 19-year-old kid who thought he had all the time in the world. The next morning, I woke up with a crick in my neck and a mission. You can't grieve forever, and you certainly can't live in a dump. I found Dad's old toolbox in the shed. The tools were rusty, but they felt good in my hand. Solid. I spent a week just clearing, ripping out the mildewed carpet in the living room, scrubbing the kitchen floor on my hands and knees. I found an old photo album, and in it, a picture I didn't remember. Me, maybe 8 years old, gap-toothed and sunburned, sitting on a picnic table. And next to me, a girl, a teenager, 18, maybe 19. Chestnut hair, a kind smile. She was holding a book. Harper. Harper Dawson. Our neighbor. My babysitter. I remembered her in flashes. The smell of peppermint, the way she'd read The Hobbit to me doing all the voices, the way she'd sneak me extra cookies when my mom wasn't looking. She was, I realized, the first girl I ever loved. The way an 8-year-old loves. Pure, simple, and with absolute certainty. I hadn't thought about her in years. I figured she was long gone, married, kids, living in a suburb somewhere, reading stories to her own children. I tossed the photo onto the dusty mantle and went back to work. By late afternoon, on what must have been day 4 or 5, I was out front. The front lawn was a jungle. The push mower I'd found in the shed was an ancient, rusty beast. It coughed and sputtered every time it hit a patch of clover. I was wrestling with it, sweat sticking my t-shirt to my back, cussing under my breath, my hair plastered to my forehead. That's when I heard it. The creak of a screen door next door. I knew the house on the right was still occupied. I'd seen a silver Subaru in the driveway when I rolled in, a newer model, clean, which looked out of place next to my rust bucket and this forgotten lane. I hadn't expected her. Harper Dawson stepped off her porch. She was carrying a ceramic mug, steam curling up into the late September light. She was 34 now, 10 years older than the last time I'd really looked at her, but I would have recognized her anywhere. Same chestnut hair, a little longer pulled into a loose, messy knot at the nape of her neck. Same quiet way of moving, like the air made room for her. She wore an oversized gray sweater that slipped off one shoulder and a pair of faded jeans rolled at the ankles. Barefoot. Even though the porch boards had to be hot from the afternoon sun. She stopped at the edge of her yard, maybe 15 feet away, and just looked at me. Not the quick, neighborly glance you give someone new moving in. This was a real slow look, the kind that starts at your face, travels all the way down to your mud-caked boots, and then, I swear, all the way down to whatever was left of your soul. I straightened up, feeling stupidly self-conscious. I wiped my forehead with the back of my wrist, leaving a streak of grime. I managed a dumb little wave. "Hey, Harper." Her lips curved, but it wasn't quite a full smile. It was more like the memory of one. "Eli Grayson," she said. Her voice was soft enough the cicadas almost swallowed it. "You grew up." I laughed. It was more out of reflex than anything, a nervous bark. What else do you say when the girl who used to babysit you, the girl you had a massive childhood crush on, is staring at you like she's trying to solve a puzzle that's been missing pieces for a decade? Yeah, I guess that happens. She took a sip from her mug, her eyes never leaving mine, that steady, unsettling gaze. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "You remember what you promised me when you were 10? I blinked. My brain, already addled by the heat and the mower fumes, scrambled through childhood memories. Tree forts? Scraped knees? The summer the whole town lost power for a week? Nothing. She tilted her head, and that half-smile grew, just a fraction. "You picked a dandelion, a big fluffy one. You got down on one knee, right there." She pointed with her mug to a spot in her backyard, "and you told me when you grew up you were going to marry me." Heat crawled up my neck. I could feel it, hot and prickling. I opened my mouth, closed it, then let out that short, nervous laugh again. I don't actually remember that part. Sorry." Harper's eyes softened. Something flickered behind them I couldn't name. Not amusement, not nostalgia exactly, something heavier. "That's okay," she said, her voice even quieter. "I do." For a second, neither of us moved. The mower ticked as it cooled. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked once and then stopped. The silence stretched, filled only by the cicadas. I waited for her to laugh it off, to wave and head back inside like neighbors do. She didn't. She just stood there, holding her coffee, barefoot in the grass, looking at me like she was seeing two versions of me at once, the scrawny kid with the gap-toothed grin, and the man standing in front of her now, sunburned, covered in grass stains, and a little lost. I cleared my throat, the sound rough. "Good to see you, Harper." "You too, Eli." She took a small step back toward her porch, then paused. "Welcome home." She turned and disappeared inside. The screen door banged softly behind her. I stood there for a long time after she was gone, staring at the spot where she'd been. The echo of that last sentence hung in the air like the late summer heat. Welcome home. Funny thing was, for the first time in years, it actually felt like I was. That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't the ghosts. It was her. I sat at the kitchen table and on my phone's spotty data, I Googled Harper Dawson. I felt like a creep, but the curiosity was eating at me. There wasn't much. She was the head librarian at the county library. There were a few pictures of her at children's story hours, smiling at kids, holding up Dr. Seuss. No husband, no kids, at least none that were obvious. No social media profiles I could find. She was, in the digital age, a ghost. It only made me more curious. What was she still doing here in this town, living in her childhood home, just like me? But where I was running back to a place I'd abandoned, it felt like she had never left. The next few days fell into a rhythm I hadn't expected. Mornings were mine, coffee on the porch, listening to the birds wake up, the smell of sawdust and old wood while I tore out the rotting boards on the back steps. Afternoons belonged to the hardware store, runs to the post office, the slow, awkward relearning of a town that had kept breathing while I was gone. And almost every day around 4 o'clock, when the sun started sliding west and the heat loosened its grip, Harper would appear. Sometimes she'd just be watering the hydrangeas that grew along the fence line between our yards. Sometimes she'd walk over, slow and deliberate, with a plate covered in foil. Peach cobbler, pecan sandies, once a slice of chocolate chess pie that tasted exactly like the county fair. We never made plans. She'd set whatever she brought on the porch railing, linger just long enough for a hey and how's the house coming? And then drift back to her side of the yard like it was the most natural thing in the world. But it wasn't the desserts that kept pulling me outside, that made me start checking the clock around 3:45. It was the quiet, the way the silence between us never felt empty. It felt full, weighted. One sweltering afternoon, I was on a ladder, patching the gutter above the porch. I was hot, frustrated, and pretty sure I was about to fall. She showed up carrying 2 mason jars of iced tea, sweating condensation. She handed one up to me without asking. "You're gonna fall and break your neck," she said, squinting up at me, shielding her eyes from the sun. "Probably," I answered, taking a long drink. The tea was perfect, strong, sweet, with a hint of lemon. She laughed, a short, surprise sound, like she hadn't meant to. And the sound of it settled somewhere low in my chest, a warm, unfamiliar feeling. Well, try not to die on my account. The paperwork would be a nightmare. That was the first time I really noticed how little she talked about herself. I'd mentioned the city, in vague terms, the job I'd walked away from, the ex who still had half my books in her apartment, and Harper would listen, head tilted, eye steady, never interrupting. But when I asked about her, "How's things at the library?" Oh, quiet. Someone tried to check out a squirrel yesterday. A squirrel? It had gotten into the returns lot. Mrs. Gable thought it was a new kind of audiobook. A tiny smile. Keeps me on my toes. She'd deflect with a shrug or joke or another slice of pie. I liked how people out here don't pry. They just wait. I saw her again a few days later at the local IGA. It was the only grocery store in town, a small, cramped place that smelled like sawdust and overripe bananas. I was in the frozen food aisle, trying to decide between a Tombstone pizza and generic brand fish sticks, when I saw her. She was in the produce section, talking to Mr. Henderson, an old farmer who must have been 90. He was holding a cantaloupe, looking confused. Harper was leaning in, speaking slowly, clearly, with a patience that was almost angelic. "No, Mr. Henderson," she was saying, her voice soft. "This one is better. See the webbing? That's what you want." She wasn't Harper, my neighbor. She was Harper the librarian. Calm, capable, in charge. She helped him pick out 2, then walked him over to the checkout, patting his arm. She saw me over by the frozen peas, holding my sad pizza. She gave me a small nod, that same quiet half smile, and then turned her attention back to Mr. Henderson. I felt like I'd seen something I shouldn't have. A glimpse of the person she was when I wasn't around. And I realized, standing there, that the woman who seemed so quiet and hesitant in her own yard was in fact holding a piece of this town together. Then came the evening. I learned that waiting has limits, and that her quiet was a wall, not a personality. I'd driven into the next town over to drop off some paperwork at the lumber yard. I'd run out of excuses. I needed a job. The house wasn't going to fix itself, and my savings were dwindling. I took the long way home, past the county nursing home. It's a low brick building with too many flags out front, trying to look cheerful and failing. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a handful of cars under the harsh yellow security lights. Harper's silver Subaru was one of them, and she was still inside it. I slowed, not sure what I was seeing at first. She sat behind the wheel, forehead resting on the steering wheel. Her shoulders were moving in tiny, almost invisible shakes. The windows were up. The engine was off. She looked small. Like someone trying to hold the whole world together with nothing but willpower and failing. I eased my truck past, parked 2 rows over, and killed the lights. I didn't get out. I don't know why. Maybe because walking up felt like trespassing? Like interrupting a private, sacred ritual. Maybe because some kinds of pain need witnesses, not rescuers. I, of all people, knew what it was like to just need a minute to fall apart before you had to put the pieces back together and walk inside. I just sat there, in the dark, my engine ticking. I watched her for 5, maybe 10 minutes. I saw her hit the steering wheel once, a short, sharp burst of anger that startled me. Then she just sagged. Finally, she lifted her head, wiped her face with the sleeve of her cardigan. She stared straight ahead at the brightly lit entrance of the nursing home for a long, long minute. Then she started the car, put it in drive, and left. pulled out of the parking lot, and headed back toward our street. I followed, at a distance, just to make sure she got home okay. She did. I watched her pull into her driveway, the headlights cutting across my overgrown lawn, and then the house door shut, and her lights came on. I went back to my house and did something I hadn't done since I was 12. I wrote a note. I agonized over it. I wadded up 3 pieces of paper. Hey, are you okay? Too nosy. I saw you. Too creepy. I landed on something simple. I found a travel pack of tissues in my glove compartment, still sealed. I grabbed a sticky note from a drawer. If you ever need someone to drive you home, I'm right next door. No questions. Eli. I folded the note around the tissues and walked across the dark, dew-soaked grass and tucked it under her windshield wiper. I felt like a teenager, but it felt like the only thing I could do. She never mentioned finding it, but the next afternoon, when she brought over a loaf of banana bread, still warm, the smell of cinnamon and cloves making my empty kitchen feel like a home, she set it on the railing, looked at me for a long second, and said, "Thank you." 2 words, barely above a whisper, but they carried more weight than anything she'd said so far. A couple nights later, the weather finally broke. A cool front pushed through, and for the first time in months, the humidity was gone. It felt like autumn. We were sitting on her porch steps, sharing a pot of coffee, because the evening had turned cool enough for it to feel right. Fireflies blinked in the side yard. Somewhere down the road, a tractor rumbled past, probably a farmer trying to get his last bit of hay in before the rain that was forecasted. I finally asked the question I'd been swallowing for days. "Are you okay, Harper?" She stared into her mug, like the answer might be hiding at the bottom. "Nobody's asked me that in a long time," she said, her voice flat. Not in a way that expected the truth. I waited. The crickets filled the silence. She took a slow breath. "My dad's at the county home. The one you passed on the way in?" I nodded, not saying I'd seen her there. "He's got dementia. Alzheimer's, really. It's aggressive." She said the word aggressive like it was a physical thing. Some days he knows me. He asks about the library. Some days he thinks I'm my mom and asks where his little girl went. She paused, her knuckles white on the mug. He asks me where I went. I'm at the nursing home every day. Every day I'm not at the library. 10 years of that, Eli. 10 years of being the only one left who remembers what he used to be. My mom, she couldn't handle it. She moved to Florida a year after the diagnosis, said she couldn't watch him fade. So she left me to do it. Her voice stayed steady, almost flat. The way people talk when they've told the story so many times, it's stopped feeling like theirs. She laughed, but it came out brittle and sharp. After that, I stopped telling people I was tired. Stopped telling them I was anything. It's just easier that way. Easier to bring people banana bread than to tell them you're drowning. The crickets sawed away in the darkness. I didn't try to fix it. I didn't say I'm sorry or that sucks or any of the useless, empty things people reach for. I knew what empty platitudes felt like. I'd been swimming in them for months. Instead, I just reached over and set my hand on the wooden step beside hers, palm up, close enough that she could take it if she wanted. She didn't, but she didn't move away either. After a long minute, She turned her head and looked at me. Really looked at me. And in the dim yellow glow of her porch light, I saw it all. The exhaustion, the deep, profound loneliness she wore like a second skin. And underneath it all, something stubborn and soft that hadn't quite given up. I am okay most days. But some days I forget what it feels like to have someone notice I'm not. I nodded, my throat tight. I notice, I said. It was all I had. She studied my face, like she was trying to decide if I meant it. Then she gave the smallest nod, a tiny acknowledgement. She picked up her mug and stood. The moment was over. Night, Eli. Night, Harper. She walked inside. The screen door creaked shut behind her, but the porch light stayed on long after she was gone. A soft, steady glow spilling across her yard and onto the steps where I sat for a long time, listening to the quiet and realizing it didn't feel so empty anymore. The story, it's about these moments, the quiet ones, the ones that change everything. If you've ever felt stuck or lonely or just waited for someone to notice, maybe this story is for you too. I'm putting a lot of myself into this. If you're connecting with it, if you want to see where this goes, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It lets me know you're out there listening, and it means you won't miss what happens next. Because the quiet, well, it was about to get very, very loud. The rain came in sideways that night, hard, relentless. The kind of storm that makes an old house groan and the gutters sing. The forecast had been right. I was on the couch, the one I'd salvaged from the living room, with a lukewarm beer and a baseball game I wasn't watching. The wind was rattling the new windows I'd put in, and I was silently thanking myself for patching that gutter. Then the knock came. 3 soft taps, almost lost under the drumming of rain on the tin roof. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. Nobody knocked on my door, especially not in a storm after 10 p.m. I opened the door, and Harper was standing there, soaked. Water streamed off the hem of her tan trench coat, her hair plastered dark against her cheeks. She was holding a rectangular glass dish cradled in her arms like a peace offering, a thin towel wrapped around it. "Hi," she said. Her teeth were chattering, just enough to notice. I made lasagna. Too much lasagna. Thought you might be hungry." I stepped aside without thinking. "You walked in this?" She gave a sheepish half-shrug as she crossed the threshold, bringing a gust of cold, rain-scented air with her. It wasn't raining this hard when I left the house. The kitchen light felt too bright, almost surgical, after the dark porch. I took the dish from her. It was still hot, even through the towel. I set it on the stove while she peeled off the dripping coat. Underneath, she wore a simple black sweater and jeans, both clinging to her in a way that made me look at the floor longer than necessary. "You want a towel?" I asked, my voice sounding rough. "I want to stop shaking," she said, attempting a laugh that didn't quite land. I disappeared down the hall, came back with one of Mom's old quilted towels, the good ones, and handed it over. She dried her face and hair, then just stood there, hugging herself, her eyes flicking around the kitchen like she was seeing it for the first time since she was a teenager. "I really did make too much," she said again, quieter, to the floor. "I've got plates, forks even." I found 2 plates, 2 forks, and a couple of mismatched wine glasses I'd found in a cupboard. We served ourselves straight from the dish, standing at the counter, because neither of us felt like looking for a spatula. The lasagna was perfect. Layers of sausage and ricotta and a sauce that tasted like someone had spent all day thinking about comfort. We ate at the oak table under the single hanging bulb. The rain hammered the windows and thunder rolled slow and low over the fields. For a long time, we didn't talk. Just the scrape of forks on plates and the occasional crack of lightning that lit up the kitchen, freezing her in silhouette. Then she set her fork down, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at me, straight on. "You never asked me," she said. I swallowed a bite of lasagna. "Asked you what?" "The promise, the dandelion." I put my fork down too. Figured it was just a funny story. "It wasn't," she said, her voice quiet but intense. "Not just. You were 10, I was 20. I was home from college for the summer, and my dog, Buster, you remember Buster? A faint memory. A big, clumsy golden retriever. Yeah, big, dopey, loved to chase squirrels. He'd just died. Got hit by a car on the county road. I was a wreck. I was 20 and my world had ended. I was sitting on the picnic table in my backyard just sobbing. My mom didn't know what to do with me. And you tiny, gap-toothed, serious little kid, you marched right over." She was looking past me, at the memory. "You didn't say anything. You just sat next to me. Then you went and picked that dandelion. You got down on one knee, and you said," I remember the exact words, "Harper, don't be sad. When I get big, I'm gonna marry you, and then you'll never be sad again." And you gave me a purple plastic ring from a gumball machine. Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes were glassy. I laughed, of course, at the time. You were 10, but I kept that stupid plastic ring. I found it last week when I was cleaning out a drawer. I didn't know what to say. The rain filled the silence for us. "I'm not telling you this because I expect anything," she went on, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I'm telling you because I need you to understand why I look at you the way I do sometimes, why I keep showing up. You were the last person who ever promised me forever and actually meant it, even if you were a kid." She gave a small, sad smile. "I know how ridiculous that sounds." "It doesn't," I said, and I was surprised by how much I meant it. "It doesn't sound ridiculous at all." She looked down at her plate again. "After Nathan left, my fiancé, I stopped believing in promises. I got real good at being the strong one, the one who didn't need anybody, the one who brought the lasagna. But some nights, Eli, I am so tired. So tired of being the only one holding everything together." Her voice cracked on the last word. She pressed her lips together, embarrassed, and stared hard at the table. I reached across the table, slow, so she could see it coming, and I covered her hand with mine. Her skin was cold. She didn't pull away. "I'm not 10 anymore, Harper," I said quietly, "and I'm not going anywhere. Not right now. That's all I've got. But it's true." She turned her hand over, palm up, under mine. Her fingers curled, just enough to hold on. "I don't need you to marry me, Eli," she whispered, her voice thick. "I just need to know if things got heavy, if I let you in, would you leave too?" The question hung between us, raw, enormous, terrifying. I thought about Sarah in Columbus, who said I was stuck. I thought about the job I'd walked away from, the life I'd been running from, and I thought about Harper's porch light, staying on every night, a signal she didn't even know she was sending. No, I said. The word came out rough, certain. I wouldn't. Thunder rumbled, closer this time, shaking the old house. She looked at me for a long, long moment, her eyes searching mine, and then something in her shoulders loosened. She let out a breath that sounded like it had been waiting years to escape. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. It wasn't about that. She scooted her chair around the table until she was beside me. She rested her head against my shoulder, and I, almost automatically, wrapped an arm around her. She felt small and cold, but she fit. The lasagna went cold. The rain kept falling. And for the first time since I had come home, the house didn't feel empty at all. We just sat there in my parents' kitchen while the storm raged outside, and for a little while, neither of us was holding anything together alone. The morning after the storm, Harper was gone before I woke up. I'd fallen asleep on the couch, and I don't know when she left. Sometime before dawn, slipping out like a dream. I found a note on the counter, written in her neat, precise librarian handwriting, on the back of an old grocery receipt. Lasagna reheats better with extra cheese. Thank you for last night. H. That was it. No phone number. No, we should talk. No smiley face. Just those 3 lines and the faint scent of rain and cinnamon still clinging to the kitchen. And then she disappeared. Not literally. I'd see her silver Subaru pulling out early in the morning before I'd even had my coffee, and not coming back until well after dark. The porch light, the one that had been my steady beacon, was off by 9. Her curtains were drawn tight. When our paths did cross, me covered in dirt from digging up a flower bed, her carrying a stack of library books, she'd give me a small wave and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Then she'd disappear inside before I could say anything more than, "Hey." I got it. I'd been there. She'd cracked herself open, just a sliver, shown me the raw edges, and now the fear had rushed back in like floodwater. The vulnerability was too much. It was easier to retreat to the safety of neighbors. I'd been there myself, so I gave her the space she was silently screaming for. Even though every instinct told me to walk next door, knock on her door, and refuse to leave until she let me back in. But what would I say? Hey, thanks for the emotional confession. Want to have another one? So instead, I threw myself into the house, into work. I'd gotten the job at the lumber yard, which led to a gig with a local construction crew. Good money, honest hours, the kind of back-breaking physical work that leaves you too tired to overthink. The crew was run by a guy named Sal, an old-timer with hands like leather and a perpetually cynical squint. "You're working hard, city boy," he grunted at me one day as we were framing a new deck. "Running from something?" "Just needed a change, Sal," I said, hammering a nail. "Uh-huh," he spat. "Only 2 reasons a man works this hard. He's running from something, or he's running to something. You ain't running to anything I can see. So what is it? A woman?" "Something like that," I muttered. Figured. He squinted at my work. "Your lines are straight. You can stay." That was high praise from Sal, and the work was good. I was planting roots. I was proving, maybe just to myself, that I wasn't just hiding out here until the next escape hatch appeared. But every nail I drove, every wall I primed, I was picturing Harper. watching from her kitchen window. A week passed, then 2. The silent treatment was starting to feel less like giving space and more like being rejected. The banana bread was long gone, the lasagna was a memory. One Saturday, I was on her side of the fence. A picket had broken in the storm. I was measuring a new piece of wood, the saw resting on the grass. She finally spoke first. She was standing on her porch in an old Denison University hoodie, her arms wrapped around herself like the morning was colder than it was. "You don't have to fix my fence, Eli." Her voice startled me. I hadn't heard it in days. "I know," I said, not looking up from the measuring tape. "This one just happens to be in the way." Silence stretched. A crow called from the big maple tree that shadowed both our yards. She came down the steps, barefoot again, and stopped a few feet behind me. The grass was still damp. She said something next. "I'm sorry that I disappeared." I set the hammer down. I turned to face her. The morning sun caught the lighter streaks in her hair, the faint shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there before the rain. "I'm not asking you to be brave every day, Harper," I told her, my voice gentle. "I'm not even asking you to be brave today. I'm just asking you not to decide for both of us that I'm going to leave." Her mouth trembled, just a little. "I've been left," she whispered, and the words were sharp, like little pieces of glass. "I've been left by everyone who ever said they'd stay. My mom moved to Florida the minute the doctor said hospice. Nathan couldn't wait it out. My dad doesn't even know who I am half the time. I'm really good at being the one who doesn't get left, Eli. I'm not good at trusting someone won't." I took one step closer, then another, until we were close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her green-gray eyes. "I'm not them," I said, and it felt like the truest thing I'd ever said. "I'm the guy who's been running for 5 years and finally found a place he doesn't want to run from. And part of that place is you." She searched my face, waiting for the catch, the fine print. "I can't promise you forever, Harper," I went on. "I'm still figuring out how to promise myself tomorrow. But I can promise you every today I've got, one at a time, starting right now." The wind moved through the maple leaves overhead, scattering a few early yellow ones across the grass at her bare feet. Harper's shoulders dropped. The fight, the tension she'd been holding for 2 weeks, just went out of her, all at once. "That's enough," she whispered. She didn't hug me, she didn't cry. She just reached out, slow, and brushed a splinter off my forearm with careful, gentle fingers. Then she let her hand rest there, her palm warm against my skin. We stood like that in the middle of the yard by a broken fence until the sun climbed higher and Sal, my crew boss, texted me about a job in Millersburg. From that day on, we stopped pretending. It wasn't a romance, not like the movies. There were no big declarations, no rushing, just a quiet understanding, a new normal that grew in the small, everyday things. I'd show up after work, covered in sawdust and grime, with a 6-pack of beer and sit on her couch while she graded library late slips. She'd bring me coffee, black, just how I liked it, when she saw me on my roof at dawn fixing shingles. We'd eat dinner on one porch or the other, sometimes talking, sometimes not. The silence was comfortable now. We'd sit and listen to the crickets, and it was peaceful. I started leaving a toothbrush in her bathroom, in the back of the cabinet. She started keeping a spare jacket of mine, a flannel I'd left behind, on her hook by the door. One Sunday afternoon, she took me to the nursing home. "He's having a good day," she'd warned me in the car. "That's almost harder. It gives you hope." Her dad, Frank, was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, wearing a plaid shirt. He looked like a faded, thinner version of the man I vaguely remembered. He lit up when he saw her. "Harper, baby, there you are. I was wondering where you went." "I'm right here, Dad." She kissed his forehead. He looked at me, squinted. "And who's this? You finally ditched that bum Nathan?" Harper froze. "Dad, this is Eli. He lives next door, in the old Grayson house." "Grayson? Billy Grayson's boy? Well, I'll be. You look strong. Strong enough to fix that tractor. The one that's been broken since '98? "Yes, sir," I said, playing along. "I'll take a look at it." He called me son. He told me a long, rambling story about a fishing trip in 1973. He called me Nathan twice, and Billy, my dad's name, once. Harper watched us, her hand on his, with something soft and terrified in her eyes, like she couldn't decide whether to hope or brace for impact. When we got back in the car, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She was quiet. "He used to call Nathan that too. Son," she said very quietly to the windshield. I reached over and laced my fingers through hers. Her hand was cold again. "I'm not Nathan," I said. She squeezed once. "I know." That was the closest we came to talking about the future. It was enough. Fall settled in, slow and golden. The maples along Willow Creek Lane turned the color of fire. The air carried that sharp, sweet smell of wood smoke and leaves burning somewhere down the road. I'd taken on more hours with Sal's crew. The house was finally coming together. New windows that didn't rattle, porch boards that didn't try to trip me, a kitchen where the light felt warm instead of tired. Harper's place got some attention too. I replaced the gutter that had been hanging by a prayer since spring. She painted the front door a deep barn red while I held the ladder and handed her brushes. We never talked about whose house we were fixing. We just did the work, side by side. Music drifted from an old radio on her porch. Hands brushed when we passed tools. One evening, we drove out to the ridge above town, a place I hadn't been since high school. The cell service died, and the sky felt close enough to touch. We sat on the tailgate of my truck with a thermos of her strong coffee, or sometimes a bottle of cheap red wine, and watched the lights of our tiny town come on in the valley below. She started leaning into me without thinking. I started resting my chin on the top of her head, like it had always belonged there. One Saturday in late October, the air crisp and clear, she showed up at my door. She was holding a small wooden box I recognized from her living room shelf. "I found something," she said. Her voice was soft, almost shy. I cleared off the kitchen table, and she opened it. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a stack of old Polaroids tied with a faded twine, and a purple plastic gumball machine ring. She pulled out the top Polaroid and handed it to me. I laughed until my eyes watered. It was me, 10-year-old me, on one knee in her backyard, sunburned and gap-toothed, offering up that exact purple ring. And there was Harper, 20 years old, sitting on the picnic table in cut-off shorts and a Cleveland Indians t-shirt, laughing so hard her eyes were slits. On the back, in my smudged 10-year-old's marker, "To Harper, will you marry me when I'm big? Check yes or no." She hadn't checked either box. I looked up at her. She wasn't laughing. She was just watching me with that quiet, intense look she got sometimes, like she was memorizing the moment in case it decided to leave. "She kept it," she said. Not because of the promise. Not really. I kept it because that day You looked at me like I was the only person in the world, like I was magic. I set the photo on the kitchen table between us. You kept it all this time. She nodded. I used to take it out when things got heavy, when Dad stopped recognizing me for weeks at a time, when Nathan's stuff was finally gone from the apartment and the quiet got too loud. It reminded me that somebody, once, chose me, even if it was just a kid with a ring from a gumball machine. Her fingers brushed the edge of the old photograph. I don't need you to keep a 10-year-old's promise, Eli. I reached across the table. I didn't take her hand. I picked up the ridiculous, cheap purple plastic ring. It barely fit on the tip of my pinky. I'm not keeping it, I said, my voice thick. I'm making a new one. She looked up, her eyes wide and a little scared. I don't know what next year looks like, Harper, I told her, my voice raw. I don't know if I'll ever be any good at forever. I'm still the guy who runs. But I know I wake up every day and I want to be right here with you. And as long as that's true, I'm not going anywhere. The words felt huge, coming out of me, the guy who'd walked out of his job, his apartment, his life. But they settled between us, gentle and solid, like stones in a riverbed. Harper's mouth trembled. Then she did something I'd never seen her do. She let go. Completely. She came around the table, climbed into my lap like it was the most natural thing in the world, and buried her face in my neck. I held her while she shook. Not with sobs, just with the release. The relief of carrying everything alone. For so long. And finally, not. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red, but they were clear. I don't need forever, Eli, she whispered, her hand on my cheek. I just need you to stay today, and then tomorrow, and then the day after that. Deal, I said, and we sealed it. The way we sealed everything. Quietly. A kiss that tasted like coffee and October air. Slow and certain. No audience, no rush. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell the night before Thanksgiving. Soft, thick, and silent, blanketing the yards and the roofs and the space between our houses, until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. We spent Christmas Eve on my couch, the one I'd fixed, under an old quilt of my mom's. We were eating leftover lasagna, warmed up with extra cheese, and watching the colored lights from the little tree we'd cut down blink against the frosty windows. Her head was on my shoulder, my arm was around her. The dog we'd adopted from the shelter, a scruffy, one-eyed mutt named Rusty, who thought Harper hung the moon, was asleep across our feet. There was no ring, no proposal, no grand speeches. We didn't exchange big gifts. I'd built her a new set of bookshelves for the library's children's section. She'd found a rare first edition copy of The Hobbit at a state sale for me. It was just quiet, steady, the simple, non-negotiable choice to stay. Some nights I still catch her. She'll be looking at me across the kitchen table, or when she thinks I'm asleep, with that old look, the one that's waiting for me to vanish. I just reach over and lace my fingers through hers until the fear fades. And some mornings, I wake up before dawn in the house I grew up in, and I listen to her breathing beside me, and I feel that same small panic, that I'll ruin this, that I don't deserve this, that the running is still in me. Then she'll shift in her sleep, her hand finding mine under the covers, and I remember, this isn't about being perfect. It's not about forever. It's just about showing up today and then tomorrow. We never went back to being 10 and 20. We didn't need to, because now, finally, we know exactly what we want. And we're still here. Thank you for listening. This story is about promises, the broken ones and the ones we keep. I want to know your story. Leave a comment below and tell me, what's the most meaningful promise anyone ever made to you, or one that you kept, even when it was hard? I read every comment. Share yours, and let's turn this into a conversation. Thanks for being here.